Hey, welcome to the Roasting Shack. I'm Scott Pears, owner and operator of a small coffee roastery here in Salem, Oregon. And we're continuing our elements of coffee, and today we're going to talk about why grind matters, and why it should matter to you. I've been obviously focusing on manual brewing methods over auto drip, just because I think you can get just such a more superior cup of coffee out of that. I'm never going to change my mind on that, but I will say, if we're talking about the one element that you can control with an auto drip of any type, and that one element is going to be grind, right? And I guess I'm going to do like, what is grind? And essentially, grind is when we ground something up, like coffee beans, and we create, the smaller they are or the larger they are, right? We either create more surface area, meaning smaller particles with more surface area for water to interact with, right? Or we create less surface area with larger particles that'll take the water longer to infuse and longer to interact with, right? So what does this allow us to do when we grind up something? Well, it allows, if you remember, or enables extraction of soluble compounds, which, if you remember, coffee is 98% water and 2% soluble stuff that we're trying to pull out of it, right? Out of those grinds that we're going to end up giving us taste. So it's really super significant on what coffee grounds can do and how you decide to grind them. And so I'm also going to direct your interest, depending on what your brewing method is. You need to focus in on what is the what is your baseline. And what I mean by baseline is what does whatever brewing method recommend for grind, like whether it be a coarse ground, whether it be a fine ground, whether it be whatever. You want to know that as your baseline, and then you can tweak left and right, more finer or more bitter, as we kind of talk about it, according to your likes, right? And there's huge windows. Like, I could go into the coffee, style versus grind type, and there's huge windows of these, like, where people like them. And so it's not like this narrow thing. So don't think that just because they say coarse grind and you like it finer, that's wrong. No, it's not wrong at all. In fact, there's large windows for every single window of grind, and that's why you'll see people get all intense on grinders, because they're like, well, the more settings you have, the more options you have, and that is totally true if you want to geek out. But if you're just wanting a good cup of coffee, start with that baseline that they recommend. Make sure that you're getting it ground to that, and that's why I always recommend getting your own grinder, and we'll talk a little bit about that too. So without further ado, it's like babble along, and I know my buddies are going to be like, okay, you weren't concise, Scott. But let's talk about how, if you under or over extract something, right? We talked about that with water. You can change the taste of stuff dramatically, right? So grind size does that, right? So let's talk about grinders really quick, and I don't want to go too much into the mud on this, but I will tell you there's a few grinders on the market. There's manual grinders, which actually can do a really good job as well, but they tend to cost as much or more than, at least a good one, than an electronic one, which I'd recommend just because it's easier, right? And I'm a lazy coffee drinker. I like things to be easy. So let's talk about blade grinders. Blade grinders is the most common. It's the cheapest. And the issue is that really it creates inconsistent or different size coffee particles, both large and very fine, and it creates an inconsistent cup from day to day. So a cup of coffee will not taste the same because it won't grind the same every day. So consistency is what matters. So then you'll hear burr grinders, and that they basically work with two large grinders moving, and crushing the coffee bean at a fairly consistent rate. And they'll come out a lot more consistent, and so consistency is what makes coffee easier to adjust, right? Because then if you adjust the size, it actually matters, because you know that they're all generally that size. So that consistency matters in your cup of coffee, right? As we're going to talk about how to tweak, finer or more coarse grinds. But not everybody, people have asked me, like, what do I recommend? And of course, I generally just default to the Baritza Encore. I really feel that that's a really good machine. It can do everything to include espresso, but I would say if you're looking at espresso, I'd go to an espresso specific grinder, but it can do it. It just doesn't have the adjustments that I would label. They do have a replacement burr that you can put in there, and it can hit those espresso areas, I guess, settings to where you could tweak it. But I just don't think it's for your bang for your buck. You're going to pay more money for those replacement burrs, and you might as well just buy something specific for if you love espresso versus pour over or other auto drip methods. So there's my 2 cents on that. Barisma Encores, what I'd recommend. I get no props from that. I just think they make a really good product that produces a very good grind, and you can adjust the adjustments. I think they have over 40 individual settings, and I think the newer one might actually have more. And that's more than enough for you to be able to tweak and enjoy your grind, and they last forever. I have a Barisma, and I think I have it going on 7 years now. So 6 years. So anyway, so how do we control grind? Why is grind important? And how do you taste the need to change? Right? So if you have a 2-course of grind, right, and let's say you start at your baseline, but it's maybe 2-course for your taste palate, or maybe the coffee itself is not tasting right, even though it's a good coffee. Hopefully it's fresh roasted, because then it's fresh, right? But 2-course is going to make something under extracted or kind of weak tasting, right? Less flavorful. And then, like, conversely, if you go too fine, right, and these are generalities just to help you, you can over extract, which can make it taste bitter in some cases. And just being able to go down or up in setting can make a huge difference on how you perceive that extraction that occurs, right? So when you have the 2-course, right, you have bigger chunks. It takes longer for the water to extract from it, right? So what are things that you might notice in your cup of coffee if you have it and you're like, man, this just isn't cutting it? Well, it's going to be like kind of watery. It might be sour. I've heard it lacks sweetness, and then you'll hear complexity in there, which I think is kind of a tough one, because complexity to you and complexity to me are going to be 2 different things. But just to know what that means, if it has those elements to it, you're going to want to go from a coarser grind to a finer grind, like, and be diligent about how you make your adjustment settings, right? Like, go up 2 clicks or go up 3 clicks, or just to see if you can taste a difference. Don't go up 1, because you probably won't notice a huge difference on 1 unless you've really zeroed it in, and a lot of people don't want to go to that level of effort, right? So finer grinds are kind of the same thing. They have a higher surface area because there's more cuts in them. They're smaller. The water can extract faster, right? Because they're smaller. They've been cut more. So you're going to have a faster extraction time, which means the water can pull out of those more rapidly, right? More easily. And you have a propensity, if you leave it into that zone with the hot water, to over extract, right? Which can cause like kind of bitter taste. It can, kind of an ashy or chalky feeling to it. Maybe muddy. Muddy is a word, that, like a mouthfeel that, like it's kind of coarse in your mouth, like you can taste it. And so if you have a bitter brew, what do you want to do, right? Well, you want to try maybe going a little bigger so you don't have those elements, right? You can also look at different filter options, like maybe switching up your filter. Like I use metal filters, which will give you a little more fines, which may cause a sensation like that, but maybe a different level filter too, depending on what you're using. But anyway, so what are things that you can do to fix this, right? Well, first of all, I think you want to target in. You kind of know what coarse versus fine can produce in taste, so that allows you to adjust. Of course, I'm going to always plug, and I know I'm plugging myself on this. Get fresh roasted coffee. You want a date on that coffee. realistically, there's a shelf life on any roasted coffee bean. So if you're buying something out of a grocery store, that could be 9 months to almost 2 years old at times, depending on what the storage was. Beans can degrade in storage, so if they're exposed to heat and cold back and forth, it's going to extract all the good stuff, and it'll make a stale bag of coffee, depending on how long it sat on that shelf, and depending on what the storage scenarios were during transportation, and just them, whatever they're stocking and how they stock, right, and how it was held, right. So that's something. What does that do? I mean, as soon as that bag, even if it hasn't been exposed to oxygen, which is the number one killer of good coffee, as soon as that bag is exposed to those elements, it can actually go stale in the bag if it's been in there a long time. You're always going to hear me recommend, I say, like if you have a closed bag and you keep it in a nice dark area and it's generally cool, between like 60 and, you can probably go up to 80 degrees tops, and it's consistent temperature, right? In the dark, not being heated by an external source of any type. I mean, you can keep it in an airtight bag that's not been opened, probably easily up to 3 months without having any degradation, maybe longer. I guarantee my stuff up to a month just because I'm just being overly safe. And to be honest, use as soon as you open a bag, use within 2 weeks. I mean, consuming it within 2 weeks is recommended because oxygen oxidizes and pulls out and extracts all the flavors, aromas, and starts degrading your flavor profiles pretty quick. So those are things like with fresh roasted coffee you want to have. So having fresh roasted coffee is probably one of the most key things to enjoying a cup of coffee, and understanding that just because it's bagged and sealed does not mean it's fresh. And so you want to look for that, roast date, and you want to make sure that the bag has at least a valve on it, a one-way valve, so it's been off-gassing and doesn't let other things in, but it's going to be as fresh as you can get it, right? So what can you do? I guess like if you're if your aromas and stuff are going away, well, you can start. You can change your grind a little bit. You can go finer. If you like if you know that you have older coffee, sometimes going to a finer grind, right, is going to help you, or increase your ratio. More grounds, right? You can do that, and both those will help extract more solubles, that 2% that we want to get in coffee that gives us taste. And they'll compensate for that loss of flavor. So that's something you can do if you have older coffee sitting there and you're just like, man, I don't want to waste it, but how do I get my flavor out of this? Well, you can make it a finer grind. So the other thing to that is like when you do open up a bag of coffee, what are you doing to keep it, to minimize oxygen? Because oxygen is what is going to kill that at that point. It oxidizes it. It's going to dull flavors, it dulls aroma. I mean, it happens pretty quick once you open the bag. I recommend AirScape containers. I know, and I sell those, so I have a stick in the game on that too, but there's a reason I sell them, and if you can find a better container, please tell me, because I'll carry it. But this has been the best. They're airtight. They keep heat and radiant heat and stuff protected generally. They push and maximize your oxygen that got exposed. They push that out when you push down on it, so they're a great system. And so storage of your coffee can preserve taste, right? Because you're not having that constant exposure. You're mitigating oxygen. You're not preventing it totally, obviously, once you've opened that bag, but you're definitely mitigating. And that does help, right? The other thing is to understand roast levels. I'm going to talk a little bit about roast and grind, but like you're going to find darker roasts. Darker roasts are less dense because they've been roasted more, right? They're more porous. So they lose more weight during the roast process because they've been getting cooked longer. And they're way more soluble, which means they're going to extract faster. So that's something to consider if you have a dark roast when you're doing it. That might affect the time you have it exposed to the hot water, right? Conversely, light roasts, they're going to be a little denser. They're going to be less porous, even when you grind them up, right? The water is going to take longer to extract from a lighter roast. And so you want to, to compensate for that when you're, coming up with your times and stuff. Like if something doesn't taste right, it might be as simple as just making a lighter roasted coffee, a finer grind, right? To allow for that extraction of taste and everything. So there is a difference on, like if you have a preference, right? My preference is like medium dark. So like in the medium range, but on the darker side, which would be like a Full City Plus. I appreciate that because I like the blend of roast flavor with origin, right? I like both. But I still like the roast notes because you get the chocolatey stuff. You get like some deeper, complex notes to me that give you a whole spectrum going across. But there's people that love light roasted coffee, and they like that brightness, and completely opposite for me. I was kind of born on military coffee, so I still have kind of a like for darker stuff. And I think most Americans were kind of raised on dark coffee. I mean, anyway, let's talk about just kind of as we wrap this up, what are factors that help you control taste, with a manual method, and that the manual versus auto drip, and you're going to have contact time with that hot water, right? We've talked about that. You want to be able to have a specific heat that is recommended for whatever method you're using, and I just look it up online. It'll pop right up, and then you can adjust whether it's a coarse ground or a fine grind. Either way, flow rate. Some people gauge completely on flow rate. They're like, yeah, it needs to be like within 30 seconds of 3 minutes, plus or minus or whatever, and you can go off of that too, because that's time, right? So you have the extra, your contact time, and they're basing everything on that flow rate through your medium, which is your grinds, and that'll impact the taste of your coffee, right? And you can tweak your flow rate with your grind, right? Finer is going to make it slower, coarser is going to make it faster. So you can actually tweak it to get closer to maybe a recipe you saw online, where they said, hey, it should be about 2 minutes. Well, if it's going too fast, you need to make it finer. And if it's going too slow, you need to make it coarser. So, and you can control taste by that way. So that's all good news. So, and then you have the just general rules behind your grind is going to be taste, right? In the end, your taste. And so auto drip, like I said, the only way you can tweak taste with an auto drip in general is your grind. So just remember, like, if you're tasting a coffee that you know to be good, and it's like too weak, it's probably under extracted, right? Less flavorful, it doesn't have the taste that you remember it should. Well, then you can, the correction to that is to make it more fine, right? And then likewise, like if you're like, wow, this is a little bitter, or maybe it's, definitely not pleasant in a different way, which means you might have too fine of a grind, right? It's getting extracted too fast for whatever your method is, or your taste buds just don't like it. You can go ahead and change that and make it coarser. So I hope this helps you. I know it's a lot of information. The two things that you need for good coffee extraction with manual process is your temperature of your water, right? I want to say I use I think it's Bonavita. I might be mispronouncing it, but a Bonavita kettle, and it's all programmable and everything, so I can adjust my temperature as I see fit. So that's a huge plus right up front. And then, obviously the Barisma grinder, which I think you can tweak, and it has enough, it's good for like any of those pour over manual methods. And you got plenty of room to tweak, grind either finer or more coarse. And then of course you control your roast level, and which is a huge taste that can span. It changes the cup. Your one coffee bean roasted at 4 different levels has 4 different tastes. So sometimes you might not like something here, but you might like something darker, or vice versa. So just there's a lot of things to consider today, though we were focusing in on the grind of it, right? And how that interacts with our water and time, right? So I hope this helps you. I'm excited. we're going to talk a little bit more about origins tomorrow of coffee and generalities in taste and why you may be interested in that, especially if once you get drinking coffee, you kind of get because you'll hear people use bold coffee, and bold coffee can mean a lot of things. Bold does not necessarily mean good tasting, because you might be just used to burned coffee. A lot of people mistake bold coffee for they mistake bold coffee for burned coffee, like it's over roasted. But once you taste the difference, and you can taste a true bold coffee, that it doesn't have to be over roasted to get that bold taste, you're getting the actual combination of roast taste and origin. You'll get a whole nother appreciation for taste in your coffee, and we're going to talk about that tomorrow. All right, so once again, I've kind of babbled on. I violated all things. My buddy was not able to help me with this one, so it went long. But if you like any of the information in here, please subscribe. I don't get anything out of this unless you buy a Clever Dripper or an Airscape container from me, which you'll find are less money than if you go online, because I don't raise my prices until I have to pay more. So I hope you like this. Be happy, coffee people, and I will see you tomorrow.